this? Well, I didn't get to give my thoughts on Tyson Fury's fight this past weekend against Tom Schwartz. I didn't get to react to that in my previous video because it ran a little long. There was a lot to cover. So we're going to do that here. We're going to talk about that fight and just, what my thoughts are on that fight. Now, let's be honest with ourselves. Nobody viewed Tom Schwartz as a clear and apparent threat to Tyson Fury.
Nobody.
You asked around whether you're talking about Tyson Fury's fans or Tyson Fury's critics. Both seemed to have been in agreement that this is a fight that Tyson Fury should win comfortably.
It's a gimme fight.
So those things in mind, the biggest hurdle in this fight wasn't even the fight itself. The biggest hurdle was gauging whether or not Tyson Fury could entertain a crowd on this side of the Atlantic. That was the biggest hurdle. We know he's got what it takes to win the fight, but how he wins the fight was the important part, that you don't chess match this guy. You don't go in there boxing circles around the guy winning a ho-hum points decision. Because, it's already a gimme fight. Look at the guy that you're in there with, Nothing against Tom Schwartz, God bless him. Undefeated guy and all of that, but this is a guy who is largely untested on the world stage, in the world scene, an unheralded opponent who most people aren't familiar with. He's certainly not one of the bigger names, one of the top 10 upper echelon guys at the weight. And, the fact that you're in there with a guy like that, you winning is not the biggest challenge. It's whether or not you can be entertaining whilst winning the fight. And, for Tyson Fury in particular, there was a question mark as to whether or not he could do that because, Tyson Fury, for all his virtues, he's not known as a knockout puncher. He's not known as a heavy hitter. Tyson Fury's bread and butter really is the boxing, the tactical elements of the sport. And these are things that, at times, they do go unappreciated with the casual fan. The casual fan, they may not have the same appreciation for Tyson Fury's particular style.
That me and you might have.
It being that Tyson Fury is a characteristically defensive fighter. And, defensive fighters in the sport of boxing, they get a bad rap. They're not always fan-friendly, so that's really what the hurdle was. Tyson Fury beating Tom Schwartz wasn't the challenge. The challenge was beating him and being able to entertain the crowd at the same time. In many ways, this almost felt like it was Tyson Fury's American debut, except he already fought here before this past weekend. This was kind of like he was just reintroducing himself to the American public. And for what it's worth, I think he did a good job. I think he lived up to and exceeded the expectations that people had for him. The reason I say this is because, once again, it wasn't ever about beating Tom Schwartz.
We knew he could do that.
Tyson Fury beating Tom Schwartz was as much a foregone conclusion as Wilder beating Brazil or Wilder beating STIVERNE in the rematch. You understand? It was a foregone conclusion that he wins the fight. It's how he wins the fight that was really important. And I think he did a fantastic job. That if you're going to fight in a showcase fight, then you might as well make a show of it. And that's what Tyson Fury did. So if I'm giving Tyson Fury credit for something, it's not even the fight itself so much as how he handled the situation. We go back to Deontay Wilder's rematch with STIVERNE. And in my reaction video, I talked about how he turned a negative into a positive, because watching him fight STIVERNE yet again, regardless of the circumstances,
this is mandatory challenge.
It's not something that people were asking for. We know what people were asking for at that time, and STIVERNE himself did not represent the upper echelon, the upper crust of what the heavyweight division was at the time that rematch took place. In many ways, that was a gimme fight. How this was a gimme fight. The only real difference is that, STIVERNE was his mandatory challenger. Same deal with Dominic Breazeale. But it was a foregone conclusion that Wilder should win that fight comfortably. And he managed to turn a negative into a positive by winning the fight in the fashion that he won the fight, that it was a violent knockout, a sizzling KO, and he exhibited a lot of dominance, the kind of dominance that, me and you, we can see through the smoke and mirrors. We know that STIVERNE's not bringing much to the table, but to the casual fan who just so happens to come across footage of the knockout, they don't know any better. They're watching this thing, they're watching him beat the hell out of this guy, and it gets their attention. It grabs their attention, allows such a knockout to go viral. He managed to turn a negative into a positive. He turned a gimme fight into a viral video. And I feel like, in many ways, that's more or less what happened here with Tyson Fury versus Tom Schwartz. He managed to turn something that could have been perceived as negative into a positive. if you're going to be in a showcase fight, you make a show out of it. That's what Tyson Fury did with the Apollo Creed-esque, jumpsuit or whatever. He had the hat, the stars and stripes, the whole production. And in the fight itself, the characteristic of the fight, this was a fight where you could see that Tyson Fury is light years ahead of anything that Tom Schwartz has ever seen. Light years ahead of anything that Tom Schwartz is equipped to deal with. He put that on display, that he's the better man in the ring in every single way, and he can fight the fight however he wants to fight the fight. If he wants to pepper the guy with shots or really sock it to him, he can do that. He can have his way and do whatever he wants with this guy. That's what you're expecting to see, so that's what he put on display for you. And he was entertaining in doing so.
That's what you came for.
That this fight is a fight that can be over as soon as he wants it, to be, with little to no resistance. He can have it his way. He is selling himself as the Gypsy King, and that's how he fought. So overall, I'm not the least bit floored that Tyson Fury beat the guy. I figured he can beat the guy. It's how he beat the guy that has me saying, all right, good job, because that's what you needed to do. You need to prove that you're an attraction without a Deontay Wilder, without an Anthony Joshua on this side of the world. And I think Tyson Fury did that. I think he did a good job of that. Hats off to him. Now, everything we just discussed, all those aforementioned particulars, those particulars address the business of boxing, the marquee value of it, and how Tyson Fury, looking the way that he looked, affects those elements. But if we look over to the sport of boxing, if we're going to discuss sport and what is sporting, I would say that this knockout of Tom Schwartz doesn't communicate anything about Tyson Fury that you didn't already know. The same is true of Wilder's knockout of Brazil or his knockout of STIVERNE in the rematch. It's one of those situations that in terms of sport, assessing the fighter, assessing his body of work, his resume, and what he's capable of, you didn't learn anything new about Tyson Fury in this fight the same way you didn't learn anything new about Wilder in his past fight with Brazil. You understand? In that way, you might want to curb your enthusiasm if we're discussing sport. If we're saying that, okay, this is one of the best guys in the world, well, you're not going to look at this fight because this guy, this Tom Schwartz guy, he doesn't represent any of the best and brightest fighters in the world. So this wouldn't be the fight that you look
as
at,
the best example,
that you use as an example to make that point. Because Tom Schwartz, we knew ahead of the fight, he doesn't got what it takes to pose any kind of resistance. So what credit you give Tyson Fury for this past weekend's fight, if that's what you want to call it, but what credit you give him really depends on what you're giving him credit for. Are you giving him credit for putting on a show? Or are you giving him credit for beating this guy? Because, if it's just about this guy, we knew he could beat this guy. I think he deserves even more credit for being able to make a show of it. Because there was more of a question mark in regards to that than whether or not he could actually beat this guy. We figured he could.
Already.
The obstacle for Fury really was proving that he is an entertaining attraction without a Deontay Wilder, without an Anthony Joshua or some other name on this side of the world. And if you can entertain that many people with the likes of a Tom Schwartz, okay, that's saying something. So all the credit that you give him, it really depends on what it's for. Now moving on from that, looking ahead, beyond this weekend's fight, there seems to be a question as to whether or not Jarrell Miller is in the running to face Tyson Fury next. In the article, it talks about how Jarrell Miller has already spoken to Fury's co-promoter, Bob Arum of Toprank, and how his suspension for having tested positive for 3 different banned substances will be up in September, and how he'd like to be back in action by October. And if such an opportunity to face Tyson Fury would be afforded to him, it's an opportunity he would jump all over. And now Frank Warren, Fury's lead promoter, was quoted as saying, "I don't know exactly what Miller's position is at the moment, but it's something we will look at. We will look at all options. The whole team will sit down and we will make a decision. I'm sure an American opponent would be the best option, but let's wait and see. We will look at the rankings and it's something we'll work out this week." And it feels like it was just yesterday we were giving this guy shit for testing positive for not just 1 banned substance, which is pretty run-of-the-mill, but 3. Count them, 3 banned substances in what was the biggest opportunity, what could have been the biggest fight of his entire professional career. It seems like just yesterday we were giving this guy shit. And ahead of this news, it feels like it's almost premature, to have the conversation of where does Jarrell Miller go from here? Where can we expect to see him emerge now that, whatever ties he had to Matchroom have been all but severed? Eddie Hearn was fuming when the news broke that, Jarrell Miller had tested positive for everything but the kitchen sink. Eddie Hearn wasn't happy about that, so the safe inference was whatever relationship and whatever they had going on before was not something that was going to be going on if and when Jarrell Miller were to return. And with this news, we gain an insight into not only what could be going on in the future for Tyson Fury ahead of this weekend's fight, but also Jarrell Miller. His future. Where does he go from here now that he's on the rebound and he's got to pick up the pieces? Jarrell Miller's banned substance fiasco, the whole scandal, it was perceived as being even more egregious than other instances where a fighter tested positive for a banned substance, because in the case of Jarrell Miller, he tested positive for three separate banned substances.
He was juiced.
So, a lot of people were readily giving him a lot of shit. And, he went on to give his reasons as to why things happened the way that they did. He admitted that he did take something, he did mess up, but he didn't take what he took in pursuit of a competitive edge. He gave some reason, but I didn't even spend a lot of time on that, because I figure that no matter what he's got to say after the fact,
it don't mean much.
This is only an admission you're making because you've already been caught. Had you not been caught, you wouldn't have been explaining that shit to begin with. So whatever you got to say right now, that goes out the window, man. It's whatever. The damage is done. Because, lest we forget, when the news broke when the news first broke that, Jarrell Miller, he had tested positive for a banned substance. In the beginning, Jarrell Miller actually tried to deny taking anything. He did. He vehemently tried to deny knowingly taking a banned substance. But as the news kept coming out that, this guy tested positive for not just one banned substance, but 2 and then subsequently 3, it became more and more difficult for Jarrell Miller to keep up with his own lies. So yeah, you admitted it, but that's only after the truth came out.
It already came out.
So whatever admissions you're making now and whatever creative ways you choose to explain what was going on, it's besides the point. It doesn't matter. And you know what? In all likelihood, most people don't even believe you anyway. Most people, what they might be thinking is, okay, you took a whole heap of shit because you were looking for a competitive edge. But you know that in spite of how egregious that whole situation was, boxing itself has a revolving door policy when it comes to guys who test positive for performance-enhancing drugs, that in many ways, getting caught and the penalty for getting caught is really just a slap on the wrist, a formality, and before you know it, that guy, that offender who tests positive for a banned substance, he'll be back before you know it, and that's what it looks like here with Jarrell Miller. This is what we've already seen in the case of Lucas Brown, Alexander Povetkin, Luis Ortiz, many others. More guys than I can name off the top of my head, more guys than I have time to mention and discuss in this video. That as egregious as that whole situation with Jarrell Miller was, it really was only a matter of time before he'd be back in action. So the question then becomes, if and when he is back in action, how likely is it that Tyson Fury will be the guy that he squares off against? And I'll tell you the truth, that in spite of these preliminary talks, I'm not holding my breath. It's possible that the next time we see Jarrell Miller back in action, it will be under the Toprank banner. I do kind of lean towards that conclusion, that somebody's going to have to pick up Jarrell Miller. In all likelihood, it won't be Matchroom, but it could be Toprank. They may decide to pick him up. And, it might happen that way, but that in and of itself doesn't convince me that Fury's the next guy he's going to fight. That, I struggle believing. I struggle believing it because, whoever Tyson Fury faces next, it's got to be an interesting enough guy that they can sell the fight, but not so interesting that they jeopardize what plans they have for the future, namely that Deontay Wilder fight. That they can't put him in there with a guy who might stifle those plans. And you know what? Jarrell Miller, for what it's worth, he is a form of a threat. I mean, even if you don't think that Jarrell Miller wins the fight, what you can say is that could be a fight that is a difficult fight for Tyson Fury, maybe. That maybe there's a possibility of sustaining injury, thereby, hampering a Wilder rematch. I mean, what I'm getting at is they've got to put him in a guy that's an interesting enough guy that people will pay attention, but not so interesting that they'll jeopardize their plans. And Jarrell Miller, mixed feelings about what he brings to the table in a Tyson Fury fight. Who would have thought we'd even be matching those two names together? Boxing is a crazy sport. Seems to me that Pulev is a more likely option than Jarrell Miller. Pulev that is older than both Tyson Fury and Jarrell Miller, and Pulev, whose style I feel, his implementation is a bit easier for Tyson Fury to work around than Jarrell Miller's implementation. Jarrell Miller, who's a pressure guy, who's a volume guy, who's a come-forward guy. The only question when it comes to Pulev is whether or not Pulev would be willing to fight Tyson Fury next. That's the only question. Because Pulev is in prime position for an IBF title shot. The thing is, Andy Ruiz is holding that title right now. And Andy Ruiz is going to be fighting Anthony Joshua in his very next fight. The sanctioning bodies themselves, including the IBF, they've gone on to say that they're not going to stand in the way of that rematch. All systems are a go for that rematch. They won't try to stifle it with any mandates. So use your heads. If you Pulev, an Andy Ruiz fight ain't going to get you the same money that an Anthony Joshua fight would have got you. But at the end of the day, it's Andy Ruiz that's got the belt, and you've got a title shot at his belt. In that situation, do you stand to make more money waiting for an Andy Ruiz title shot, or do you stand to make more money fighting Tyson Fury? That's what the question becomes. And the entire Andy Ruiz situation, even that situation is unstable, because who's to say that Anthony Joshua won't win back his titles? If he can win them back, then that might incentivize that title shot for Pulev, because then he can say, all right, so I'm back to being in line for a big money fight, not just a title shot, but a money fight. It all depends on what happens. Everything's topsy-turvy right now, but I dare say that even in spite of all those aforementioned particulars, I'd sooner believe that Pulev is the next guy that Tyson Fury fights rather than Jarrell Miller. I don't know how much stock I can have in that. I mean, I think that Jarrell Miller may end up on the top-ranked side of the street fighting on ESPN, but I don't necessarily think that he's going to fight Tyson Fury next. That bit of it, that's a bit of a tough sell.